Welcome to our webinar, Participatory Adaptation Planning, Examples from African Cities, our fourth webinar of the series, organized in cooperation with the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, CDKN. My name is Evgenia Mitroliu from the Resilient Cities team at the ICLE World Secretariat in Bonn, Germany, and I will be hosting this webinar today. First of all, I would like to inform you that we will keep all participants muted for the duration of the session to minimize background noise. If you have a question or are having technical difficulties, please send us a message at the question chat box. For those of you who don't know about us, ICLE Local Governments for Sustainability is an international membership organization for local governments around the world, with over 1,000 members in 84 countries. We promote local action for global sustainability and support cities from our global, regional, and country offices with targeted programs and events. Every year, ICLE convenes the annual Global Forum on Urban Resilience and Adaptation to Climate Change, widely known as the Resilient Cities Congress. This year, the Resilient Cities Congress will take place during the UNFCCC Climate Change Talks in Bonn. Our webinars focus on a selection of key themes presented by international experts which bridge conversations initiated at the Congress last year with new ideas, directions, innovations in the run-up to Resilient Cities 2015. In today's webinar, we will introduce two CDKN-supported projects, Building Coastal Resilience implemented in Ghana and the 4 PCCD project implemented in Mozambique. These two projects offer concrete examples of how to establish successful participatory planning processes and build partnerships among government, academia, the private sector, and local communities. The webinar will share lessons learned from the planning experience of the two projects and suggest how these learnings can be extrapolated to other regions and what they can offer to development planners and practitioners elsewhere. We will discuss the benefits of participatory adaptation planning for the project's viability and impact and the challenges involved throughout the process. Today's agenda includes two presentations, lasting approximately 30 minutes, followed by a 10 to 15-minute Q&A session. Felix Miamero will give a brief overview of the project in Ghana, introduce the community-based risk assessment tool used, and discuss the impact of the project and the potential for scaling up at the national level. Dr. Kassan Broto will then share her key outcomes. Dr. Vanessa Castan-Broto will then share key outcomes from the 4 PCCD project in Mozambique and explain how a participatory planning tool and the establishment of a climate planning committee facilitated the multi-stakeholder collaboration process. You can type in your questions during the presentations and we will read them out at the end of the session. When typing in your questions, please indicate which speaker you're addressing your question to and, if you like, the name of your organization. As previously mentioned, please also type in any questions related to technical issues so we can help you sort them out. Allow me to introduce you our first presenter, Felix Niamedor, who is a community resilience building facilitator for the Ada community in Ghana, as well as a program technician for the Chicago State University's Teaching and Learning Materials program. Felix has over 7 years of experience working with communities focusing on education, community development, and building resilience towards climate change. As a coordinator for the Bridge Kids ADA and director for the God City Foundation, he regularly meets with opinion leaders to deliberate on issues of community development. Today, Felix will share his experience with the Building Coastal Resilience project in Ghana, present the role of the Regional Institute for Population Studies in facilitating the multi-stakeholder planning process, and share insights on the effectiveness of the Crystal tool for community risk screening. Felix will discuss the enabling conditions for successful community engagement and conclude with remarks on the project's impact and future steps. Felix, please go ahead when you're ready.
Yes, I'm presenting on the CDKN project Building Climate Change Resilience in Ghana, specifically building climate resilient communities. This project actually was done in a city called Adamfo and that of Jamestown in Accra. And this project, we look at an urban city and a midway city based on the population differences. So I present the data on Adamfo. Adamfor is a community with a population over 200,000 within 136 persons per square kilometer. It is one of the communities that has economic advantages for people. So people are densely populated around. The CDKN project that we did was we tried to bring all these communities together to look at all these communities within this area together to look at how the difficulties, the risks that climate change poses to them in terms of coastal erosion.
Felix, may I interrupt you? Sorry, Felix, may I interrupt you? You can maximize your screen so we have a better view.
Okay, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then is it better now?
The little icon down on where you see on the screen that says 36%, okay, you can maximize it. Yeah, exactly.
Can you see it now?
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Sorry for. Yes, so the project look at how all these communities come together and what's the risk that climate change poses to them. So some of the risks that climate change poses includes losses in farming and dwindling fish catches. So as a project leader and the project team, we brought all these community leaders together and we speak in a language that the community people can understand. So we brought people from all walks, fisher folks, fishmongers, traders, teachers, students, all the categories, using a gender parity that will make everybody inclusive. So here is a walk discussion throughout the communities, trying to understand how they feel, what the risk level to them. And we try to look at some of the risk areas within each community. And we try, after all these discussions on the field, we brought them together to sit down and discuss the problems that they have seen and how all of us can come together to work it. Mind you, this team is made up of people who work in national. This man here whose back faces the camera works with the UN policy on UNFCCC in Ghana, and this is another wildlife official. So, and these are agents from the National Development Commission. So this have helped. So from the community walkways and trying to understand the problems, we brought everybody together, experts, technical experts, lecturers, policymakers, politicians, and the community people. One, to build capacity and create awareness of the problems in those communities, and to come out with a risk communication framework so that the people in policy, people in the communities, people who are politicians, everybody will try to understand what the problems are and how these people are adapting to the issues. So this is one of the policy dialogues where we are trying to bring the matters on board for everybody to see. So, and we realize that walking through the communities and discussing with the people in the language that they understand, we realize that the people themselves they have a good knowledge about adaptation, and they are able to link adaptation positively to the risks in the various communities. And we also realize that the risks that climate change poses to them, those who couldn't adapt better, properly, have sorted to migration. And some others, the problems have given them key to unlock some alternative livelihoods that never used to be, but because of the risks that the current situation is posed to them. And we also realized that communities in a language that they understand also came out with local contingency plans to help them work out their challenges. Now, in all these things, how do we realize some of these things? We, like I said earlier, we have evidence-based, we had evidence-based climate change policy roundtable discussions, community-based reciprocal learning, and this is just like what we have read about the communities, what other publications had, what the history had. We collated all those things and we sent it back to the community. We hired people who can speak the language of the people, and they gave them those information and they talked to it. Those ones that they believe they are real to their situation, we took them, and those ones that are outside their understanding, that is, they cannot validate it, we took it out. And we have also surveys and focus group discussions to understand their point of view, to support what literature has on the communities. And also we use key informants who are technical persons working in policy areas and politicians who are coming from these communities. And we also have stakeholder hands-on training. This training is to help them do contingency plans and to understand what climate change and its risks and adaptation processes are. And above all, we also had what is called the ubiquitous learning process. And this is a process of going through learning, practice, learn, practice process until one is able to identify with a problem and come out with the right adaptive strategy to handle them. So this is one of the, we are trying to see if these are the problems, what things in terms of adaptation and building capacity can help communities attain resilience. And we realize that when people understand the real issues of climate change, it helps them in their adaptation better and is able to enhance their awareness and appreciation of the immediate environment in terms of how they see it, in terms of how they respond, in terms of how innovative they can be in building resources and attaining to them. And far above all, that is able to help them to come up with effective response to climate change related disasters. If they are not aware, they will be taken by surprise. If they are, they will start thinking about it. And the strategy is in the language they will understand. And when they feel part of it, they are able to get through. And we also realize that things like green awards in terms of will help boost adaptation strategies. And what are green awards? There are hotels in those communities we work in, and there are other business-related activities going on. If policies can look at the works of these people and address them in terms of giving them tax waiver schemes for their business, because they are ready to support adaptation and resilience building, then the solution in helping to build adaptive capacity will not only be from the national or the assembly level, but everybody will see it as a need to do, both the private person and the public institutions. And we also see that climate compatible development should be prioritized at all levels. We sent the National Development Planning Commission of Ghana to these communities, and we realized that most of the things that they have in their platform as rules and regulations that communities use through the district assemblies have less of climate compatible development. So they are able to understand the situations, and we are seeing changes now in the policies that are coming from the National Development Planning Commission of Ghana. And we also see that early warning systems using local content will better work in terms of adaptation capacity building. Now, how do we make sure that some of these findings and the write-ups and everything go to the national level? The outstanding strategy in this matter was the thorough involvement of the National Development Planning Commission of Ghana. They are in charge of all the plans for development. So if the top failed, the down can be sustained because the directives are from the top. So we involve them right from the beginning, the inception, the very inception of the project. They were part, and we didn't give them only writings in their offices. RIPS as an institution took them to the fields. They saw the risks the people are in themselves. They saw the adaptive strategies of the people themselves, and they saw the good and the ugly in all the communities we worked in. And they, in the round tables, RIPS gave them the priority to lead the discussions. So we brought all assembly members and opinion leaders from all the communities to be part of the round table. And the directives from the National Development Planning Commission helped them to frame bylaws that can incorporate climate compatible development strategies into them. And we also see that the roundtable discussions themselves, we brought NGOs, civil society, individuals, and everybody that is doing some form of development work, from public to private, and that helped in trying to shape the discussions. And now I'm happy to mention that some of those discussions have led to various development projects like the Sea Defense in Ada and incorporation of climate compatible development in the new climate change policy that Ghana is about to start working on. And we also are trying to serve the interests of the academia and other people who may be interested in the reading and the documentation. We also came out with dissemination bulletins and brochures, capturing the findings and the processes in a way that people will understand, coming out with a summary, coming out with pictures that can catch the attention of those who are the busy ones out there. So this has helped to serve the interests of all the stakeholders who matter in this resilience building process and adaptation strategy and the capacity building activities. And far above all is the involvement of the grassroots. We got people who could speak the various languages of the individual ethnic groups in this city environment. So they can speak and identify with the language, and we're able to have local terminologies for climate change terms like El Nino, El Nina, and all the terms, adaptation, mitigation, so that they can also in their own way communicate during these roundtable discussions. And it is fun, and that has helped them to build high level of interest in the whole process. Unlike if we're speaking English, we're becoming very formal. And I must say that the directors of the project have become so informal in the round table discussions so that people can use various languages, and we had interpreters who can bring the issues that they are talking about to others to understand. So that has been the key fulcrum that has kept the project, because of the involvement of the local people. And finally, on the role of RIPS, the RIPS as an institution has facilitated, and they were the people who supported the National Commission for Development Planning of Ghana. So we provided on the platform, invited them, and they gave in their support. So in the organization and the technical assistance, in writing the brochures and the dissemination processes, we need experts, we need people who have done it before, who have some experience. And RIPS as an institution has such individuals. And also one of the ways is that we made sure that the brochures and the dissemination materials are not only given to people who are sitting in their offices. Most of the technical experts are serving in the Forestry Commission, boards of Ghana, the Wildlife Commission, the Commission on Weather, and all those other various commissions are all there. So those who are serving on them, like my director and also the project director and the project coordinator, they all belong to various boards that formulate some form of policy to drive sectors of Ghana. So these bulletins and brochures are given so that they can also benefit from it. And one of the major roles RIPS has played is to go and identify, to go to the various communities, identify people who can speak the language of the people and people who can interpret them. So it makes the adaptation processes very important because they can identify, they can express themselves in their own languages, and there are people who can explain it to others who don't understand. So RIPS has monitored and recorded this communication to make sure that everybody is part of the process.
Felix?
So I want to thank you all for listening, and I want to pause here for further discussions and directions from the organizer.
Thank you, Felix, very much for your very comprehensive presentation. We will now move on to our next speaker. So,
should I start already?
No, 1 second. So a reminder, I would like to remind all attendees that you may type in any questions at any moment for the presenters during their presentations, and we will read them after the end of the session. We will now move on, as I said, to our next speaker, Dr. Vanessa Castan-Proto, who is the Director of Research and Senior Lecturer at the Bartlett Development Planning Unit at the UCL. Prior to joining the Development Planning Unit, Vanessa was involved in a postdoctoral research at Durham University. Until 2014, Vanessa was the principal investigator of the 4 PCCD project, which was awarded with the 2013 Lighthouse Activity Urban Poor Award under the United Nations program Momentum for Change. Vanessa delivered a keynote speech in participatory planning to the UN Climate Change Conference in Bonn in June 2014. So today she will share her experience with the 4 BCCD project in Mozambique and discuss the main challenges and key opportunities during the multi-stakeholder planning process involved. She will also discuss the value of having institutionalized community representation and elaborate on concrete solutions and how local communities can best be involved. Please go ahead, Vanessa. Thank you. When you're ready.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for having me here this afternoon, and thank you after this wonderful presentation by Felix. And with both our presentations are very complementary because Felix is very concerned in bringing knowledge and information to people in a language that they can understand. I think that's crucial. But equally crucial is finding languages that also convince people who can make decisions, who can distribute budgets, and finding that language is also very important. And this is what more or less we teach here at the DPU, the Development Planning Unit in University College London, which has celebrated this year its 60th anniversary. And of course, like in other fields, development planning is now being redefined by concerns about climate change. One particular concern of mine is the fact that rather than a whole global response to climate change, well, that's important, but equally important is the local experiences and responses that happen in a local context. And sometimes they are led by local authorities. Local authorities may be the main actor leading these kind of experiences. But also there are many other opportunities to intervene, and citizens have a key role in this process. And Agatha had asked me to say a bit about this prize from the United Nations and that we received for our project. And I would like to talk about that prize more generally because Momentum for Change is recognizing initiatives that are taking the lead in doing something, and in whatever context the actors that are involved find themselves. And some of those initiatives are really exciting. For example, bringing solar panels to the urban poor in India and developing bamboo bicycles, and really exciting things that are happening all over the world. But today I have to talk with you about this experience in Maputo, Mozambique, which was really an experiment, and it finished around a year ago, so maybe I'm a bit out of date on what has happened in Maputo, because most of my work I do it here in London where I teach. And I'd like to say, before I begin talking about this, that although I was the principal investigator in the project, this is really a project that has been very much led by a lot of people in Maputo, and well, it will be interesting to see what they are doing today. This includes community leaders who are now working with a program to raise awareness about environmental issues in their communities in a neighborhood in Maputo called Chamanculose. It also includes the people in the municipality who are planning and who are connecting different strategic priorities to, at the municipal level with those of communities. And it also includes, at the national level, the organization that we work with, the National Environmental Fund, FUNAP, which is kind of position itself in thinking what to do with climate change resources, how to harness climate finance for the well-being of everybody living in Mozambique, and particularly poorer communities like in the country. So in this context, we did this project. This project started because somebody from the national government asked us to do it. And what he said, his name is Carlos Seventin, and he's the director of FUNAP. And he said in 2011, so a few years ago, he said, oh, I'd really like to have a bit of a better mechanism to understand, to get that knowledge that local communities have, and to have a systematic way of understanding what are their concerns. And what we did was to make a team that could think through how to develop that methodology for participatory planning. And when Carlos, when he talks about this project, people in a meeting of weekly, he was asked, who were the champions of this project? And Carlos always says that the champions were the people because they really embraced, they really enjoyed the meetings, and they really came to a lot of interesting ideas. But basically, we conclude one thing from this exercise that can be applied in other contexts. So one single universal finding, and is that what to do depends on where you do it, and that you need to understand very well the context before you can actually suggest the solutions. And that perhaps rushing into some standard solutions sometimes may lead to problems if the solutions are not well adapted to the context. This photo that you see on your screen is just one of these households in the neighborhood of Chamanculose, of the people who participated in the participatory planning exercise that we did. We came to participatory urban planning from what we call a rights-based approach. So not thinking about participatory planning as an information extracting mechanism about what is to be done, but rather as a framework for collective action to advance citizens' rights. So as a means to connect what you do in planning with what people need. And also, in the second point, I say as a mechanism to establish deliberative institutions in which multiple concerns can be heard and acted upon. This relates with this idea that I said that follows on from Felix's presentation, that there's a need to listen to bring knowledge and to develop knowledge that people understand, but there is also a need for institutional development, to develop institutions that can hear the people, the citizens with their everyday problems and their concerns on the ground. And then from this exercise we concluded that effective action for climate change adaptation is specific to the context of action, responds to the needs of communities and individuals, address the structural drivers of vulnerability, and leads to knowledge co-production. So the knowledge that comes is a knowledge that is understood by both policymakers and communities, and it's knowledge that comes from the combined experience in dealing together with a common problem. So this was very much the approach that we took. And what I want to raise, I'm going to give you a bit of detail of how we developed the process and the kind of methodology that we have proposed. But I want to focus really on the challenges that we found. And the reason is because we know these methodologies work. We know they serve not just to raise awareness among local population, but also to develop more effective means of community adaptation. But I think there are fundamental challenges that we have to address. And this is the thing I want to start thinking about for the future. So I think these key challenges, they really relate with three different aspects. The first one is this question of knowledge, and Felix has repeated this. Language that they can understand, knowledge that they can understand is such an important issue. It's not just because, and I'll speak about that later. The second thing is gaining institutional support for implementation. So for institutions and policymakers and local government authorities to understand what communities need, they also need to have the capacity and the institutional space to hear that. And finally, there is a big problem which Felix has also touched upon in terms of thinking. We can think about what to do in a particular context, but how does that move beyond the context in which it's happening? In terms of the question of knowledge, how to incorporate participatory knowledge in participatory urban planning, it is obvious that through participation, local citizens can express a lot of forms of knowledge which are directly relevant to the making of policy and to take decisions in a local context, particularly in terms of the consequences that they face, how climate change may be already affecting them, and second, in terms of how to act immediately and effectively. And for them to refine that knowledge in relation to the perceptions of the future and how the city is going to change with future climate change impacts, climate change information needs to be presented in relation to local experiences. But I think we still have a problem to understand what kind of climate change information is relevant to the local context. And that's partially because a lot of the climate change science has developed at a very global level. So sometimes downscaling scenarios is not that straightforward, particularly when you are talking at the level of communities and what they are doing. In terms of our exercise, we spent 9 months, I think, talking with 8 or 9 months talking with communities, and we did something very similar to what Felix did as well, which was starting with training local facilitators, training people in the society, in the communities that would start to facilitate the process, and then helping people to discuss in separated groups according to different. Oh, sorry, I got distracted by a question, but I think I'll answer the questions later. Apologies, it's not as common to do this kind of webinar, but it's really interesting. Anyway, let me just cut the story short. So the independent committees met separately, depending on their interests and depending on the different issues they face. And then we had a plenary that chose the representatives for a climate change planning committee. And then this committee, which was of 5 people, maybe sometimes supported by other people, compile information and develop the final proposals refine for not just what to do, but also how to do it. And this is what we presented to members of the government and both the local government of the city of Maputo, but also the national government, the Ministry of Environment, and the National Fund of the Environment. So, for example, some of the things that the citizens did, they did identify the causes and impacts of flooding, which is one of the main impacts they face from climate change. They collectively agreed that relocation is not feasible. It's not a feasible adaptation proposal, and this is a strong proposal from the authorities in Maputo. They did detailed proposals for community development. For example, they proposed to do a project for community mobilization. This is a project for community development that I mentioned at the beginning. They are doing this now because they require little resources for this, so they more or less could do it. They also did propose a project for separation and recycling of domestic waste, both because the waste is one of the main factors shaping the vulnerability to flooding, because the waste, as you can see in the photo on the top, the waste makes more difficult the drainage, so it has a big role on the flooding. And so they made the project with a lot of detail about how waste was going to be separated, and to the point of actually identifying an appropriate site for this project. So basically, the only thing they need now is a bit of funding to actually build that facility, so that people can bring their waste there, and then they can have a bit of waste control, which both will improve the resilience, but also would perhaps generate a bit of an income stream for the community, whatever small, because these waste streams have little value. And they also proposed a project for infrastructure renewables and drainage rehabilitation, which they are now negotiating with the National Fund for the Environment. So here is a bit of a slide that tries to explain what we try to do, and why I'm saying that we focus very much on presenting the local knowledge to big stakeholders. Because I think one of the key things of our experiment was, so the first you see the 5 groups that discuss separately depending on their interests. For example, the interests of women that are the whole day on the neighborhood, perhaps selling things at the door of their house, are very different from those who work in the more developed parts of the city, and therefore spend little time in the neighborhood. And also maybe they have different interests depending on their families. So that's why we divide them in groups. That division was also defined by themselves in an initial collective discussion. And then each group was facilitated by a local facilitator. And then they feed up in a plenary in which they selected the climate planning committee. And it was this climate planning committee which wrote a local climate change action plan. And this action plan, you can download it on our website. It's like a short document, very kind of clear and very kind of has some detail. But actually, we thought that was a process whereby the knowledge was formalized in a way that could be presented to actors who were external to the community in a learning workshop. And also in independent meetings that were directed towards institutional development and partnership building. I said I was going to talk about challenges. So the second challenge we talked about was about institutional support. And there is a lot of support for participatory planning, for thinking about the concerns of the community. But there's still a perception, there's a conflict between long-term strategies and immediate needs. The thing that for climate change you have to plan in very long-term scales. I understand that we have to look at a long time frame for thinking about climate change, but also we have to realize that the vulnerability to climate change is shaped by things that we can do today. So I do think the proposals of the citizens were very much focused on building resilience today, and I think this is something that we have to understand. We, in partnership with the University Eduardo Mondlane, we did a bit of an analysis of the different actors that could help the communities to achieve their goals. And we did a mapping of all the different actors that were intervening for climate change in Mozambique, kind of trying to see how communities could obtain support. As you see, development is still a big concern that also drives climate-compatible interventions. And the NGO sector is the largest sector helping in terms of numbers of actors intervening. But we also found that the local government played a key role, and perhaps particularly in adaptation. The local government was very much attuned to the needs for adaptation. But we also found that there were certain perceptions that may be difficult. Yes, I'm going to wrap up my presentation. Yeah. So there were certain perceptions that may be difficult to understand what people, the needs of local people. There was a difficulty in transcending views that vulnerabilities are caused by the practices of people in informal settlements. So in a way, people living in informal settlements, the people that we work with, were still blamed for their own vulnerabilities. But most of that vulnerability responds to, not all that, responds to structural factors, from the lack of services to the precarity of their livelihoods. But there's a changing institutional context, which it responds to the complex challenge for local authorities and for other government actors to respond both simultaneously to global demands to act in relation to climate change, and also to the local demands of a city still in the making. And of course, in conclusion, we saw that institutions, they did see the need to listen to local populations, but perhaps were a bit too prescriptive on how that listening should happen. So that's why we think that from this project, yes, it is in the overall scheme of things relatively easy to make a participatory process at the community level. Communities respond quite well. At least they did respond quite well here. And they had immense knowledge and immense optimism and enthusiasm for the process. But it was more difficult to move forward with that planning into something that would really change their lives a lot, beyond what they can do themselves collectively. So I think there's a need to think further how to enable transformations, or as Felix was saying, how to perhaps enshrine these ideas in national policies, in planning practice. In terms of me as an academic, this raises important questions. One is about how to act at different scales, and just to think that we cannot think easily from the local to the national scales, but we have to consider a multiple scalar spaces of intervention, and to think about how experiences travel. Both because experiences do not just travel from one local government to another. I mean, that of course that works very well, and ICLEI, for example, has shown how well that works. But at the same time, people learn in many particular ways, in what we would call also horizontal networks, at the very local level. And the other thing is this question about how experiments are really processes at work that require certain facilitation and require a bit of attention to make them work. So with this I will wrap up, but just with the conclusion that there's this need for knowledge co-production, both at all levels, at the community level, but also at the policymaking level and at the academic level. And the academics are the first ones that have to learn a lot on all this process. And thank you very much for listening. And I'll wait for your questions.
So now we will move to a quick Q&A session with the questions we have gathered so far. If you have further questions, please let us know, and please write to the chat box.
So shall we respond to the questions we see here? There is a question.
Yes, 1 second. I will ask. I'm just gathering the questions right now. So the first one we have is from Ervin Nugrava, and he is asking Felix if he can elaborate how strengthening local planning is being done within the project area, and how the process has been able to mainstream adaptation planning within the formal planning scene, seeing that this is an opportunity to change the country regulations on development planning scheme. Felix, have you heard us?
Yes. Okay. One of the things, like I said, that we did was to bring the district assembly members, and these district assembly members, they are able to pick out the bylaws from the National Development Planning Commission to enforce them in the local communities. So the idea, what we did was we brought them together, and they had one-on-one talk time with the officers from the National Development Planning Commission. And their understanding of climate-related disasters and the adaptive capacities that they have acquired as a result of being part of the process has helped them. So previously, in some of the communities, sand winning and sand mining and all that was going on. But we, through the project, were able to educate them, create the awareness, the reasons why some of these things must stop in the communities. So previously, those things were in the National Development Planning Commission's directives, but they were just there for reading. But once we brought them together and they became active participants of the process, and we were able to run scenarios, show them videos of what sand mining has done to other communities, they now picked them and started working on them in their various communities. So the participation level at the various communities that was lacking in the earlier previously, the project participation that the community leaders had has enabled them to take those initiatives on their own without waiting for any other person to support them. Because we made them to understand that any challenge or any issue that comes, they are the first to suffer. And if there's any benefit that they can derive, they are the first to benefit. So the best solution to building adaptive capacity must start with them. So these are the energies that they have received and has moved them into action, unlike maybe reading directives, policy directives in a book with no action at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. There's another question for you from Agatka Vikioli, who is asking, you mentioned progressive policies by the government and leaders. How much do they influence community engagement? Are communities more eager to engage in climate-compatible development and participatory adaptation activities if they know that there is political commitment by the government, or is their involvement independent from the government's position?
Yes, it's a very good question, and thank you for that question. The issue is the reason why we brought policymakers at a higher level is that whether communities are actively involved in helping themselves to build some form of adaptive capacity or not, the fact is still that the hierarchy of the planning and policy process lies with the government officials. So if they don't understand the processes then the more the priority on climate compatible adaptation or development dies off. But if they understand the processes and they are able to tie them to their political campaigns, and so bringing the people together is trying to network those at the top and those down. And I could tell you that some of the people came to meet their MPs at some of those meetings, and they were able to establish some rapport with them, and the discussion moves on. So they may not show interest and they may not prioritize it based on maybe some one or the other political nature. But the more you create a platform, maybe those assemblymen couldn't have had the opportunity to talk to a National Development Commission chairperson or any other person who influences them from the top. By bringing them close to the round table, they are able to understand why the commission does what it's doing, why the politician doesn't come to their communities. And they are able to establish network, which will generate and has generated. We have typical examples from Adamfo where assembly members have met their MP and DCs on climate development projects, which are in the pipeline now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. This time it is for Vanessa, and it is from Mr. Jan Wolf, who is asking, are there any plans for other neighborhoods in Mozambique to implement the same approach, the 4PCCD approach, basically?
I wish. That's what we've tried, but we haven't been able to liberate funding yet. Mm-hmm. And in fact, what I like is that this happens with no involvement of me at all. And I think the interesting thing is that we have now, through this project, we build capacity not just at the community, but also in the university and also in FUNAP. And there's a fantastic team there that could bring this forward. But the problem is that there are too many competing priorities that people is facing in this setting. So it is difficult to for already overstretched people working in these institutions to foster further change. So we've tried to liberate more funding to continue and replicate this project. It'll be fairly easy to do, but so far we haven't been able to have the funding.
Okay. I guess maybe we can have another small question. Felix Niamero actually is asking Vanessa if, since she mentioned a lack of institutional support for project implementation, what was the institutional approach mechanism used in the process?
Yes, so I think in terms of institutional development, so basically what we thought is that when our central idea was the idea of partnership, and the idea that once we develop some form of collective knowledge and there's a concrete proposal of a project to do together, that partnership will develop by itself. And in some parts we can say that approach has worked, because now local communities in Tamanculo, in the neighborhood, are working directly with representatives from FUNAP to develop the waste management project that I mentioned before. But in other cases, the process of institutional development perhaps was just transformed into a means to claims, for example, to do some claims to the local water company or to other organizations, which the citizens per se had the responsibility to intervene in their neighborhood. And then there has been also a process of establishing strengthening the community organizations that already existed. So, for example, after the project, Amandala, which is a local environmental organization that is concerned with the environment and planning, got formally registered, and its members apart from participating in our project, they also developed a bit of more capacity to do other projects. And as I say, we got funding for a small project of community mobilization, which they are managing now. So I think that one thing is the mechanism, how we plan it, and another thing is how it works in practice.
Well, thank you very much. As we have come to the end of our time, I would like to conclude our webinar and give a warm thank you to Felix and Vanessa for sharing their experiences and giving us food for thought with regards to participatory adaptation planning. And to all of you for attending and engaging with us in this very interesting discussion. We have been recording this webinar, and it will be made available on our Resilient Cities series website shortly, together with the presentations and CDKN resources for further reading. I would like to take this opportunity to invite you all to our next webinar on heat-related health risks brought about by extreme climate change events on Tuesday, February 3rd. Please visit our website for more information. Thank you all for joining us, and have a good and relaxing weekend.
Yeah, thank you.